Hey everyone, welcome to our last lecture in Concepts of Biology. I'm again really sad that we can't do this one in person. The way I typically do this lecture is I bring you all down to my animal physiology lab. I teach an entire semester biology class on the diversity of vertebrates, and I have a ton of really cool specimens. I usually lay everything out and I let you all take a look at some pretty nifty animals. So I'm quite sad that I don't get to do that with you all. But here's just a really brief survey of our vertebrate animals. So our goals are to talk about some of the diversity within our vertebrates, and we're going to talk about the classes and their distinguishing characteristics. All right, so I showed you this diagram in our invertebrate diversity lecture. We talked about almost all of the phyla at the top there, and I had crossed out phylum Chordata. So today we are just going to focus on phylum Chordata, which is our vertebrate group. So in order to be considered an animal that's going to fall into phylum Chordata, you have to have these 5 characteristics. The first is that you have to have a notochord. A notochord is what typically develops into the vertebral column. Not all animals in phylum Chordata are actually vertebrates. There's a subphylum, which is subphylum Vertebrata. Outside of that, we have tunicates and we have lancelets. And those two actually don't have fully developed vertebral columns, but they do have this notochord. You have to have a dorsal hollow nerve cord. So this is the spinal cord. You have to have a postanal tail, so a little bit of a tail that's going to extend beyond the gut. You're probably thinking, I don't have a tail, but you did. When you were a little fetus, you had a tail for a certain amount of time that ended up getting reabsorbed. So all of these characteristics end up counting, even if you only had them for a brief moment in development. You have to have an endostyle, which is similar to a thyroid gland. You also have to have gill slits at some point. So yes, you did have gills when you were a little fetus too. In fact, sometimes these gill slits don't close up properly, and you can still have a gill that's present. I actually have a gill that's still present. You can't see, I'm not gonna like put my face so close to this camera, but I have a little hole in my ear. It looks like I just got my ear pierced and I let it close, but it's actually a gill slit that didn't properly close. And for me, it's not a big deal, but there are certain scenarios where it can become an issue. Our gill slits end up becoming like different components of our sinuses as we go through our full stages of development. All right, so the first group of animals we're going to talk about, and I'm again going to do this like I did in vertebrates, starting with our simplest animals. And our simplest vertebrates are superclass Agnatha. These are our hagfish and our lampreys. These guys are called Agnatha because they don't have jaws. They can't like, they just have their mouths stuck in this position. So A means no, Natha means jaws. I have a lamprey in a bucket downstairs that I end up lecturing with for the whole time usually because I love this little guy. He freaks people out so badly. So this is a lamprey here to the right with this like nightmare set of teeth, and hagfish over here. So our lampreys are parasites. They end up actually like hooking on to fish and sucking blood from them with these mouths, so they're pretty nasty. Our hagfish are famous for producing a ton of slime, and they use this slime to escape from predators. So they'll just like emit a bunch of mucus and the predator can't hold on. Turns out there's some really interesting biochemical properties that go with this. It's like the softest recorded material. And I'm saying soft in like a physics term, like it's like 100 times softer than Jello is. So scientists are really interested in looking at the cellular component of this and what makes this material so unique. All right, so our next group is class Contrichthes. So these are fish, but they're a special kind of fish. Class Contrichthes includes our sharks, our rays, our skates, and our chimeras, which this is a chimera up here in the right-hand corner. And these guys fall into class Contrichthes because they have cartilaginous skeletons. So they don't have calcified bones the way that we do, except for their jaws. You've probably seen a ton of shark jaws, like when you go into a beach shop, but I doubt you've ever seen a full shark skeleton. And that's because they don't fossilize. They are cartilage instead of bone. So this is cool. It makes their bodies a little bit lighter. They don't have to work quite as hard to have lift when they're swimming in the water. Our next group is class Actinopteryges. So these two are fish, but these guys now have calcified skeletons. And this is a really, really diverse class. So like seahorses are class Actinopterygi. A lot of our deep sea fish, like this weird guy with the see-through head. We got electric eels, we have boxfish, pufferfish, a huge variety fall under class Actinopterygi. And then we have a third class of fish. This is class Sarcopterygi. This is a really cool class because it's an evolutionary transitional moment. So class Sarcopterygi include fish that actually have air-breathing structures. So these guys have lungs. They also have a unique fin. It's called a lobe-finned fin, where they have the beginning of a skeletal system that will allow them to support their body, like this mudskipper here, on land. So these are the first legs that we're gonna allow for terrestrial motion, along with the first air-breathing structures. So this is a moment in between our fish and our amphibians. This fish over here is a coelacanth. This guy has an interesting story because he's thought to be extinct. And it wasn't until like the mid-1900s, a scientist stumbled upon one in like an Asian fish market. And it turns out there's actually 2 species of them that are still alive. They're pretty deep sea organisms. They live in very cold water, and they have maintained this really prehistoric look because their environment hasn't shifted too much. But these guys are incredibly old looking into the fossil record. All right, our next group is our amphibians. So amphibians have some unique characteristics that we're going to talk about, and they fall into groups of these 3 animals. We have frogs, we have salamanders, and then we have caecilians, which you probably haven't heard of. These are amphibious snakes. So they don't have legs, and but they are not snakes, they are amphibians. In fact, this body shape itself has evolved multiple times throughout evolutionary history, right? It kind of looks like a worm, it looks like a snake. So we have invertebrates that have this shape, we have amphibians that have this shape, we have reptiles that have this shape. Mammals didn't quite make it, but our naked mole rat is pretty freaking close to this shape. So yeah, our Sicilian are our legless amphibians. So one of the unique characteristics of our amphibians is that they're a transitional moment too. They are going to spend a lot of time in water. They also spend a lot of time on land. So they have this really permeable skin that makes it a requirement that they stay in a moist environment. So they don't have the ability to actually keep water from evaporating from their body. They also lay gelatinous eggs, and they can lay them on land, but there has to be a water component, like it might be in a leaf that still has some water within it. And the reason for that is that they haven't developed shells on these eggs yet. And so they're just going to evaporate if they don't have water. So they are still tied to water, even if they can hop around on land. We also see this really unique change in life history stage in our amphibians where they undergo a full metamorphosis. So they start as eggs in water, and they hatch out in this fully aquatic form as a tadpole. So a tadpole is like basically a fish. These guys are starting their life as a little fish. And as they get older, they totally shift their body shape in order to be able to be on land as well. So it's this really neat moment, kind of like captured evolution in a life history stage where we see them go from being a fish to then developing these little legs, being able to get on land. And we talked about this a little bit in the biodiversity lecture too, but our amphibians are getting wiped out at an astronomical rate. And they are kind of our canaries in the coal mine when it comes to climate change, because that permeable skin that they have makes them really susceptible to diseases. So chytrid fungus is one of the diseases that is really, really wiping them out incredibly quickly. Down in my lab, I have a bunch of frogs. They're called African clawed frogs. And these frogs are unique because they seem to be not as susceptible to chytrid fungus, but they still can carry it. And African clawed frogs are invasive species. They've been released all over the world in places where they shouldn't be. And it's thought that they potentially are carrying this fungus to more susceptible amphibians. So that's another thing that we've done. So when we look at our vertebrate groups, you can learn a lot by looking at the skull of an animal. So we have these three major types of skulls here. You have your anapsids that only have a hole where the eye and the nose is, but they don't have any other holes in their skulls. The only living animals now that are anapsids are our turtles, but there have been more within the fossil record. Our diapsids have two extra holes in their skulls. These are called fenestra. So our diapsids include our birds, our reptiles, and our dinosaurs, which birds are dinosaurs, so it makes sense that they would have the same skull shape. Then we have our synapsids. So synapsids only have one hole, and these are our mammals. There's some other really prehistoric synapsids, but at this point, our mammals are only synapsids that are still living. So moving into these diapsid organisms here, class Reptilia, this is the first group that was able to become fully terrestrial. We do, of course, have some aquatic species, like our sea turtle up there, but our reptiles have evolved a few characteristics that help them to thrive on land. The first of which is the development of the amniotic egg. So the amniotic egg is one that is going to have shell and membranes in it, and this is going to prevent evaporation. Our reptiles also have keratin scales all over their body. So instead of that really permeable, delicate skin that our amphibians have, they actually have the ability to maintain moisture within their bodies without having some environmental component to add moisture in. All right, so I just, casually dropped that birds are dinosaurs, and it's true. We have what we call avian dinosaurs, are birds, and non-avian dinosaurs, which are a different lineage entirely. And there are some features that we see throughout the fossil record as we learn more and more about our dinosaurs that make this family relationship really obvious to us. The first is that our dinosaurs were feathered. We know this because we see feathering in fossils. We also see that the bones of dinosaurs have the same little indentation marks that the birds of bones do, where a quill would be found there. The feathers of our dinosaurs, well, yeah, okay. I'm getting tripped up on non-avian avian. We'll just stick with dinosaurs. The feathers of our dinosaurs usually are more of a downy variety. So this is a T-Rex with his downy type of feathering. It was likely used in sexual selection and maybe a bit in thermoregulation, but these weren't flying feathers at this point. Another shared characteristic that they have, this is a Tyrannosaurus rex, and this Tyrannosaurus rex has a wishbone, just like the one you might snap at Thanksgiving. So this is going to be a structure that's ultimately going to allow for the development of really big pectoral muscles, which will allow animals to fly. So why would these animals even be interested in flying? There's several hypotheses as to why our dinosaurs took flight. The first is that jumping for prey, being able to maybe capture some flying insects or some smaller hopping animals could be useful. It's also possible that they were gliding from trees. So instead of really flying, taking more of a strategy of like our flying squirrels, where they're able to catch some air and move from tree to tree without having to go down to the ground. It's also possible that these wings were used first for stabilization during predation. So velociraptors were thought to be feathered. If you all have seen Jurassic Park, those guys were actually a little bit bigger than real velociraptors were, but they would jump on their prey. And the idea is that perhaps they had these featherings on their arms to help stabilize them so that they could eviscerate their prey without, falling off of them. All right, so our avian dinosaurs, or our birds, have some unique adaptations that have allowed them to fully fly now. So our birds have incredibly lightweight skeletons compared to other animals. They have a lot more air pockets within their skeleton. In particular, their skulls are really lightweight comparatively. And this is why if a bird crashes into a window, they often don't survive because their skull is not super protective. It's a trade-off protection for flight. They also have air sacs throughout their body that are going to make them a little bit lighter. You see still this wishbone and a big old keel, and this is an attachment point for that pec muscle, or like the chicken breast that you all eat, and that's going to allow these animals to fly. Another thing that our birds have that some of our non-avian and early avian dinosaurs didn't have, it boils down to the symmetry of their feathering. So if you look at this bird, the feathers at the tips of the wing are longer than the feathers down here. So these are our primary and secondary feathers. And in order to actually catch air, the feathers need to be asymmetrical. So you need to have longer and shorter feathers. Our early feathered dinosaurs, their feathering was actually symmetrical. So they weren't able to fully fly the way that our birds can. All right, and then we are on to our mammals. So class Mammalia are our milk-producing animals with some kind of body hair. Um, there are different groups within our mammals, though, when it comes to reproductive strategies. So our first strangest group is our monotremes. These are egg-laying animals that I briefly talked about in our love and sex introduction there. So we have our echidna. This is like a hedgehog. He's going to lay eggs, or she's going to lay eggs. And then we have our platypus that is also going to be laying eggs. We have our marsupials. Our marsupials are going to give birth to really, really underdeveloped young. And the strategy here is to give birth and then put them in a pouch where they are going to have access to milk. And the animals are going to further develop while they are in the pouch. This is a neat strategy because it allows for the female to have offspring at different life stages. So she can be pregnant while having another joey in a pouch. And then she can have joeys of different ages in the same pouch. She's actually able to produce different kinds of milk depending on the age of the joey at different nipples, which is really cool. Most marsupials are going to be found in Australia. We do have one marsupial here in the States, and that is our eastern possum. These guys get a bad rep. I'm not really sure why. They're kind of our garbage men. They're going to help clean up around us. Their babies are incredibly cute. The adults make ugly faces, but they're not dangerous animals at all. I don't know why people don't like our possums. I think they're great. All right, and then we have our placental mammals, which is going to be most of the mammals. And in the case of our placentals, we are having full development in the uterus, and then they're going to give birth to live offspring. I'd mentioned before that this can look pretty different depending on the kind of animal. Some are going to hit the ground and be ready to get up and run, and others are going to need a lot of parental care. All right, so that is the end of our vertebrate lecture and the end of your lectures in concepts of biology. We're going to keep chugging forward. I can't wait to see all of your innovation projects and how we finish out this crazy semester. All right, stay well.